Hello and welcome to Unmissable Movies with me, Stephen Hayes, and Sam Cox.
Hello, everybody. Are you all right, Steve?
Yes, I'm particularly well. Thanks for asking.
Jolly good.
How's it with you?
Well, it's all right. This is the earliest recording I've done. It's like 7 a.m, but that's all right. Hopefully I'm going to be lucid enough to
Yeah, I was going to say.
piece together an actual episode here.
It might not be your most coherent effort.
It's also might be the last one for a little. We'll have a little break after this. I'm about to move from the east coast of the US to the west coast, so we'll see how that goes.
Lucky sod moving to LA.
Well, let's see. I'm not moving to go and live in Beverly Hills or anything. But it will be nice doing a movie podcast, being closer to the action, as it were.
Yeah, you can probably just call up. Say like we were doing this episode when you were in LA, you could probably just call Natalie Portman and say, "Yo."
No, I wouldn't be able to get her. I'd probably be able. I might get Jean Reno at a push if I really, really hammed it up.
I think you'd be more likely to get the guy playing his the mob boss kind of character. So if you haven't guessed it already, this episode we're covering the film Leon, the 1994 film. In America, I think it might be called Leon the Professional. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So I tried to find it. I looked for it on Prime, and I couldn't find it. And it's just called The Professional. It's not even called Leon the Professional.
Is that right?
And yeah, I had no idea that was the case. And I was even at a thing last week talking with some friends. And they were asking, what's the next episode going to be? I said Leon, and none of them knew what I was talking about.
Did they know The Professional?
Oh yeah, they all went, oh yeah. Heard of that?
Okay.
Haven't seen it for ages or whatever, but
this is one of those films that I feel like I don't really know how I know about it. I feel like I've landed on it by fluke in some ways, but it's one of those films that stayed with me. And even when we discussed if this was a valid contender as an unmissable movie, you weren't sure at first, were you? And kind of checked it on IMDb and realized, yeah, it's got a really high rating.
Yeah, I sort of remembered it being good, and not like in the basement of movie acclaim, but I don't remember it being one of these like amazingly critically well received movies, or popularly. Yeah. I just thought it's just another movie, and then it was really interesting because when I looked online, like it's just been. People love this film. It's got such high ratings, and even amongst critics like Roger Ebert, gives us a pretty high score. And I think I'm watching it again for this episode. Definitely helped me understand that a little bit, because I think just seeing it now and being a little bit older, understanding what's happening, particularly in terms of Luc Besson and his directing style. I think it's slightly more coherent than what I felt it was when I initially saw it, probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's a film that if you've seen it, you love it, and it's got a pretty big following for those who've seen it. But I know I've asked just a group of friends, and hardly anyone I know has seen this film. So I think it very much falls into that category of. It has great acclaim with those who have actually caught it, but for a lot of people who you just haven't come across it ever or even heard of it, a lot of people I've asked.
Yeah, maybe it is a cult classic.
I think it is. So, how was your rewatch?
Do you know it was good? It was good, and I haven't seen this film for a long time, a good 10 years or so, and so it was nice. It was like watching it with some sort of freshness. But at the same time, there were so many lines and moments in the film that are so memorable, particularly some of the stuff that Gary Oldman does, his little affectations and weird little quirks, that it just came flooding back, how memorable some of these moments are. I really enjoyed it. It's also really strange. I think probably the majority of the films I've seen with Natalie Portman have now been with her as an adult, her films that she's made in the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And so it was really, really odd seeing her that young again in a movie. And that, I think was she 11? This was her film debut.
Yeah.
But it was strange. It was like really strange. It was like, oh my goodness, yeah, there she is. and she's so young in this movie. It's not like It's not like a 16-year-old playing an 11-year-old. She really is 11 years old in this movie.
Yeah, it's almost like when you go back and watch like Christian Bale in a film when he was a kid, and you're just like, it feels so weird. It's the person you know as an adult, just in wee form.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's incredible in it. I think rewatching it for me, I was reminded of how good it is, but I was also, I probably haven't seen it maybe for 7 years, having watched it quite a bit when I first came across it. And it's the uncomfortable moments feel more uncomfortable now that I'm older and now that I have my own daughter. Like the relationship between Leon and Matilda, it's not always a comfortable watch, is it?
Yeah, agreed. I think, and that's one of the things about this film that's both possibly the thing that's controversial, but also possibly the thing that makes it what it is. And especially reading some of the critical acclaim and the critical sort of reviews and discussion around it. I saw a few things that really mentioned that if you took that piece of the story out, this film wouldn't quite have the same intrigue and interest. But obviously, you're skating on thin ice with, a subject matter like that, where you're dealing with these two characters who essentially create some kind of bizarre relationship, even though one of them is a much older man. It's just sketchy subject.
It is indeed. So should we try and briefly sweep through the narrative before then delving in a bit more, Sam?
I think so. We owe it to everyone and ourselves.
True that. I can't pull off true that. As I said,
I'm proud of you that you tried. It's got to push these things out there into the world.
So this film, the basic narrative is you've got Jean Reno's character of Leon, who we established in the first scene that he is a hitman and very skilled and very established, and we see him taking people out in all manner of different ways, which is pretty exciting, that first scene in the film. But then we find him back at his apartment building, and Natalie Portman's character Matilda is introduced, and we discover that her dad or stepdad, I think it's her dad, has been holding drugs for Gary Oldman's character Stansfield, but has been basically diluting them down and selling on part of the drugs. And
he's actually an EAD officer, right? He's a corrupt.
Stansfield is, yes.
Yeah.
So basically, there's a threat to say we want that money, otherwise we're coming for you. And he doesn't deliver it. And basically the next day, whilst Matilda is out shopping and she's getting some milk for Leon, they come back to the apartment, take out the whole of her family, including her 4-year-old brother. And then when she comes back to discover this, all the killers are still there. And she takes refuge in Leon. She knocks on Leon's door and he takes her in. And then the rest of the film is basically him training her up to become a hitman herself. But then you've got this subtext of she's missing a father figure in her life, and she latches onto him, and it becomes very much she's in love with him, like a relationship kind of love, not a father-daughter love. And it ultimately leads to a climax where she tries to go for Stansfield. She gets rescued, and then there's a massive shootout scene right at the end, and it ends not so well for some of the characters in this film.
Just like Mars Attacks.
Everything's like Mars Attacks to you.
Why does that film reference keep coming back?
It's the
definitive movie where everyone dies at the end. Although happily, Natalie Portman's character doesn't die. She gets essentially she gets relocated to a nice, swanky girls' school, someplace upstate.
So that's kind of the film in a nutshell. But let's just kind of delve into some of the performances before then we'll look at some of the scenes. So Gary Oldman in this film, this is before any of the Batman trilogy, before Harry Potter, when he was kind of renowned for playing a villain. He was in Air Force One, JFK, and he is pretty phenomenal in this, isn't it? Straight away, his introduction, where he comes to question the father, and he's kind of like starts sniffing him to try and see if he's telling the truth or not. You get a gauge for the magnitude of his performance in this film, and this is one of many instances where he went off road basically, and the guy playing the father, I think it's Michael Badaluccio, or Badalucco in this case.
Nice.
I promise I didn't write that joke in advance. And he just starts sniffing the father, and the father looks so uncomfortable when he's being interrogated, and that was not scripted, that was not planned. So the fear in that actor's eyes is real.
Yeah, I think that this has been done now, this kind of really on the edge of psychosis, crazy, creepy bad guy. I think we've seen it, a little bit in, I don't know, just Heath Ledger, and even in the Sherlock TV series, there were just things that, Moriarty did that were just so creepy and weird. So I think it's hard to see this. It's hard to see this without sort of feeling like, oh, it's been done. But this may be, one of the early, like maybe Gary Oldman beat them to it, I think, in creating this character that just has this sort of immediate, sinister, and there's a creepiness. There's like a about him, the whole sniffing thing, the way he pops these pills with this sort of theatrical, like weird, like he's like he's a creature as much as he is a person. And there's and you know what else?
Very
you
rat-like.
You get absolutely no backstory on him. Like, you don't know why he's so insane. He just is. I think that's part of the sort of terror around that character. He's just crazy, and totally unhinged. And there's even moments where you feel like his henchmen are having to kind of sort of like just move him through the building, because he's and rein him in, and kind of like he's like just completely off the rails. So
he shoots the father, doesn't he? And then the father gets a bit of blood on his suit, and the guy's already dead, and he reloads to carry on shooting him, and his henchman's like, "What are you doing? He's dead." He's just absolutely psychotic. And it's funny you should say about the Heath Ledger Joker performance, because I remember when that came out in 2008, thinking, oh, Gary Oldman could have just as easily played that character rather than Jim Gordon. And there's something Gary Oldman does in this film where there's a film where he's talking about Beethoven, and when I kind of dug into his performance, it transpired that every single time they shot that scene, the other actors didn't know what was coming because he told a different story. And that's like straight away you think of the Joker in the Dark Knight film, where every time he talks about his scars, he tells a different story. And I couldn't help but think, I wonder if there's some link there, or because it's just a brilliant characterization.
Yeah, proper movie villain in this film. So one of the things, we've mentioned already is obviously Natalie Portman. This is her debut, and it's a pretty arresting debut turn. I don't think there are many movies, that have been brave enough to just incorporate an actor so young in such a complex and sort of adult setting, and actually have the performance stand up, and be so integral actually to the story. Probably Jodie Foster comes to mind in Taxi Driver. But Natalie Portman, really, and by now we all know her and know the chops that she has, and she's one of the best actresses of her generation, absolutely, unequivocally.
Definitely.
And she's just by this point, I don't know what her upbringing was before the age of 11, but she arrives in this movie with such just depth and complexity, and she's able to cry and emote just so convincingly, and really, like, it's sad, it's so tragic, like, it's so particularly towards the end when she's forced to split ways with Leon just for her own safety as this big kind of shootout goes down. Like it's devastating. She's genuinely being torn from the only person that she loves, and it's really, really tough. But then there's also those difficult, La Femme Nikita, sort of those weird scenes where she's clearly this like troubled young girl who's got a very sort of strange and sort of, I suppose it's embryonic sort of understanding of her own sexuality. And she handles those moments with just the right tone as well. It never feels like it works. It just about works. I think one of the reasons it works is that every time she says something completely outrageous, Jean Reno spits his milk everywhere.
Squirms or
like he's in as much shock as we are.
He said in an interview not so long ago that he had to play Leon almost to have some level of slowness or learning difficulties, or it has to be absolutely clear at every point that he has no reciprocal feelings in that way, because otherwise I think this film would be completely unwatchable, because Natalie Portman does such a good job of making you believe she's got this weird, like, creepy, and she's not, it's beyond schoolgirl crush. It's like the look she gives him and everything, they're like, oh man, it's uncomfortable, but she sells them so well. And she beat 2,000 other actresses to get this role, and you can see,
how many?
She must 2,000 other actresses.
Wow, flip.
So that's a lot of people you have to beat. But she went into this film. You look at the script; it's a pretty uncomfortable premise, and it's really bizarre actually, because her parents in real life were really strict on how much she was able to be shown smoking on screen. So they were allowed 5 instances, I think it was, that she was allowed to to have a cigarette on screen, but she was never allowed to be seen taking a drag. She was never allowed to be seen lighting it. So you had all these things, and the filmmakers adhered to the parents' request. Absolutely. But you think as a parent, that wouldn't be the thing that would be bothering me. It'd be her telling the hotel clerk that Leon's her lover. Like, that's the thing that would creep me out as a parent. Flipping heck.
Yeah.
But she was incredible.
Thing to fixate on.
Yeah. But she wasn't... I double-checked to see if she was nominated for supporting actress or anything, and she wasn't. And I think, man, that's a bit of a snub, because she is incredible. For a first film performance, she is incredible.
I think it's worth saying too, it'd be easy for Jean Reno to be overshadowed by both Natalie Portman and Gary Oldman, who are just so memorable in this. But I think he really does do an amazing job. And you mentioned that very, very difficult line that he had to walk, where you never feel as though he's anything other than just pure-hearted, So to pull off a character who's both this totally, accomplished badass killer, but then also has this complete tenderness and warmth, and just, I think for him, it's this, for his character, it's like he kind of does see her more as like a person to protect, a father figure, or and he is shocked when she has her strange outbursts, like I mentioned, he spits his milk out everywhere, and flipping good job he does. It'd be strange if he didn't. So he has to walk that delicate line where he's kind of protecting her, but he's also getting something back from her. He's almost getting a bit of like social education, or she's helping him as well, just to not be this, because I think left to his own devices he would be this recluse in this dingy tenement in New York City. So she kind of teaches him too about like joy and life and having fun, and it's just a brilliant. I don't know whether they thought about other actors for him. Obviously, Jean Reno being a French actor, Luc Besson being a French director. I'm sure there was.
He was actually a small character at the end of the director's previous film, Nikita, where at the end he plays a hitman who wears glasses and a hat, and I think that was actually the origin of where this film came from. His character in that film. And yeah, you're right. He does such a good job where you come out of it not knowing if you're more uncomfortable about his relationship with Matilda or his relationship with his plant. I mean, I've definitely drank more milk and cared for my plants more since watching this film. It's such an odd thing.
Yeah, but the plant is a great way of setting up the duality of his character, that he comes home from a hit and immediately comes home to care for something. So you get that set up right away.
Leaf of his plant.
Yeah, but he's great. He really is great, and I've seen him in a bunch of other things as like a bit part, a character actor, as the French the French detective in this film, or he was
he's like MI. He's in MI1.
Yeah, MI1. I remember him in that pretty well.
Godzilla.
But this is probably the film that he's best known for, and he's fantastic in it. So I love. Let's talk about some of the scenes. And this is, before we just dive into any scenes, I think this is where this movie made more sense to me watching it this time than it has done 10 years before, because in a way this film is it's a strange blend of different types of movie, because you've got like the opening scene. There's this great chopper shot, the chopper over New York, coming over Central Park. Then it moves down to the car, the car roof shot coming through New York. And then it's a body cam, and it walks through, you're in Little Italy at this point. And then the body cam, and then it zooms into this really tight shot of the milk, on the table. And it's such a cool, stylish way to open the movie, to announce the setting.
And then you see the guys around the table, and you see the reflection in that guy's glasses. It's very stylistic. Although those shots in the street very quickly remind you it's a very early 90s film.
Well, so here's the thing, that the film does feel pretty dated, and it made me feel like, good Lord, the 90s feels like it was 50 years ago, watching this movie. Because it does feel old. I think what it boils down to is this film is so, it's like a romantic crime fantasy. It's not a realistic, gritty crime picture. It is like a bit of a fairy tale thing with all these heightened characters and crazy bad guys and very, very excessive, like violence. The violence in this film is pretty shocking, actually, by today's standards.
Yeah.
And I think what it is the blending of and I think it really boils down to Luc Besson, right? He's this French filmmaker with undoubtedly sort of French just French filmmaking in his bones, blended with this sort of early 90s American, New York crime movie. And so for me, it's a bit weird to begin with, because I'm thinking, we've got this opening scene where we are watching Leon on his first, on the first hit of the movie. It's almost like McBain, Schwarzenegger bad. It's like cheap suits, bad hairdos, the Uzi, the over the top, and I'm like, oh gosh, are we definitely going to do a podcast on this movie? Like, this is super cheesy, super 90s, and I think by today's standards, it feels very, very hammy. You've then got that Eric Serra, the typical Eric Serra, who's another French. He's a French film composer, and it's that kind of 90s, the triangle, and it's violin. Like gold. If you've ever seen GoldenEye, you'll know the kind of music I'm talking about. He did the score for that film as well. And a little side note, the producers of GoldenEye were pretty unhappy with the soundtrack for that movie.
Were they?
They actually brought another guy in who I met while I was studying music at university to basically like make it feel more Bond. The big brass and everything else, because Eric Serra's score was so kind of quirky and different and and unique, and actually,
Yeah.
you know, you notice that immediately, and it dates it. It makes it feel very early 90s. But here's the thing:
Well, when you've got those
then,
sort of those strings kind of sweeping across, I said to Beck, I was almost expecting the jealousy will drive you mad from Moulin Rouge. Like it had that same weird tension just all throughout the film.
Yeah. So there's this weird. So like the first 20 minutes, I was like, oh my goodness, this is super 90s. Like, but then what you realize is he's blended that with like almost like 1940s, 50s Parisian French filmmaking. There's like that blend of those two things, and he's almost made New York feel like Paris somehow.
Well, funny you should say that, because and there's no way you'd know this, but somehow you feel like you do, that all the apartment shots are in Paris.
Oh wow!
So anything that's inside his actual apartment room is Paris, and then everything in the corridor and beyond is New York.
I suppose they're quite similar. You'd never think that that's happening.
Yeah, and it's a funny detail, but I think even as you were saying all that, I was thinking it feels really like 1994, and it feels it, but actually, it actually feels like it could be. Some of it could be shots that were repurposed from the late 70s. It's got that same grittiness. Like Titanic was 3 years after this, which makes you think, oh yeah, like the 90s wasn't as 90s as this feels.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But once you're immersed in it, I think you're right. Like 20 minutes in, you just forget about all that, and the story takes over. Yeah, I think you're right. Stylistically, it does feel very French, and I love the whole scene where Matilda comes back from buying Leon milk again, and she says there it's 2, right, or 2 quarters, right? So there's obviously like she's obviously done this for him before, so it's a very subtle establishing of they're aware of each other at least a little bit. And when she's walking towards his door, and you've got that tension where she's knocking and he's, you know, weighing up whether or not to open the door. And then when he opens it, and you've just got this like unrealistic burst of light on her face, I think that's such a gorgeous shot.
It's like a salvation moment for her.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, I just love, it's not one of those films where you're going to talk about the cinematography for half an hour, but there are a few moments that are pretty great.
Yeah, there's some great shots of New York in this film. Like there's a great shot where he's used the landscape of New York, like you're looking essentially at a road, but the road curves in such a way that you don't see them as they're walking towards you until they kind of come over the crest of the hill, and then they both sort of appear into the shot. That's such a cool moment. And again, with the style, I mean, all of Matilda's outfits and her, the neck thing she wears on her neck, and the glasses and the jacket, the bomber jackets, like it's just the coolest. It's like graphic. It's like graphic novel almost. This film.
Yeah, and that's the scene where he says, "And I want you to stop saying okay." So maddening.
I love. I think my favorite scene, actually, now that we're thinking of it, is because for me this was the moment where just all of these. The kind of the threads, all of these different threads of like, what is this movie? It's like hyper violent, kind of graphic novel-esque, really, really like the setting is so intentionally kind of grubby, and that sort of weird Paris in New York thing. And so much style. And I think the place where it all made sense to me was the scene, the kind of the montage with the Bjork song in the background, the Venus as a Boy. It's kind of a bit of a montage of their sort of developing relationship. You've got that scene, but I think the song, I don't know why, but the choice of song was just like, that's where it just clicked for me. It just locked, like, oh yeah, I get what this film is now. I remember, well, I'd forgotten that song was in the movie, and then when I watched it on the rewatch, it was like, oh, this is so great. This is such a cool choice of song for this part of the film.
So should we talk about I've got a few lines of dialogue that kind of stood out for me, so should we lean into that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Are they all Gary Oldman lines?
No, funny enough, they're not.
There's so many crazy, creepy lines that he says in this film.
Yeah. Well, Matilda's got a few great lines because I love when she says, "Throw me out now." It's like you never answered the door. You could probably take that as a sentiment for, if you help someone, if you don't carry it through, it's like you never helped them, kind of thing. So I think that's a really cool line. When she says to him, "Is life always this hard, or just when you're a kid?" Always. It's just like, life is always hard. There's the lesson.
And it's great that he's
girl.
not. He understands, like he's not. He knows she's sophisticated enough, and she's seen enough that he doesn't need to lie to her in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. She clearly doesn't have a happy home life, and I it's almost caricature. But when they finally move in on Leon, and they have like 30, 40 armed police officers, and he says to that guy, get me everyone. He's like, who? And you've got that iconic everyone, which actually I've discovered he did it that dramatically to try and make the director laugh, but it was so effective that they've kept it in, and it's super iconic, that moment. You just think this guy is an absolute nut job.
He's an animal.
Yeah, and it's funny. We've talked about some of the great performances, and this film was pretty much snubbed universally in awards. So, and you can kind of understand it. So, Best Picture for that year was Forrest Gump, Four Weddings and a Funeral, Shawshank, Pulp Fiction. So you think that mix, it's pretty hard to get a look in. No, but you think any other year this probably would have had a shout, at least being nominated. And for none of the performances, certainly Gary Oldman or Natalie Portman, seemed a bit harsh because they're both so incredible. But it just didn't get any recognition, and it might have just gone under the radar.
Luc Besson as a filmmaker, he's pretty. There's definitely pretty quirky. I remember seeing. Is it Fifth Element? Was one of his next movies with Bruce Willis?
Yeah.
And it's
I've never seen it.
It's definitely kind of quirky and unusual, and doesn't kind of fall into the mainstream sort of Hollywood. Although I think it was pretty well received film at the time, and it's always on like at Christmas time somewhere on Channel 4 or something at midnight. But I don't know that he's had a sort of enduring, lasting impact.
No, I think he's more of largely a producer now, from what I can tell. So I think he was a producer on the Taken films and a few other things that are more recent. So I think that's probably where he's settled in a little bit.
No, I read an interesting thing about how he actually is behind the camera. So he's the one on set who's directing, but he's also, he's literally got his eye on the camera lens, which is, I suppose, unusual. Read in an interview with Gary Oldman that was that he was very aware of that at the time, and I think it gave him confidence actually as an actor to know that the director was seeing exactly what he was doing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So as we go in to talk about some of the issues with this film and things we haven't covered so far, I suppose launching on from that you have to look at the director who wrote it, and I guess some of the themes within the film, with that sense of, and I've read a little bit around this, how some women, not all, but some women who don't have a strong father figure often go for men a lot older. And now, obviously, in this film, she's only a 11 or 12-year-old. But I suppose it takes a certain sort of character to even conceive and write that script, which is a little bit... It's one of the things that's so unique about this film, that dynamic, but it's also, like, I could never write that script. And I think they had to tone down some of the scenes and some of the dialogue for Western audiences because it just did not screen well. So there was, I think there was a scene scripted where Matilda outright asks Leon to make love to her or something to that effect. And I'm so glad the final cut doesn't have that, because it would just push it beyond what you're comfortable with. It's bad enough what she says to the guy in the hotel.
Yeah. Yeah, but you, in that scene where she says that thing to the guy at the hotel, you kind of feel it's part of her rebellious, she's just quite free to be this sophisticated, rebellious character.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. The scene that you mentioned would have made this movie, I mean, probably not one that we'd be even talking about.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's...
And it's been compared to that whole Lolita thing. I think Kubrick made Lolita in the 70s, and it was based on an older book, the Russian book. And it's not quite that. It isn't anywhere near as sort of overt and explicit as that. And I think you're also aware with the Matilda character that she's wrapped up in all this sort of trauma and dejection and just a ridiculous family scenario, with her father being clearly pretty messed up in the whole drug thing. So yeah, there's a lot of sympathetic. It's a sympathetic scenario, and again, we've mentioned it, but thankfully Jean Reno plays the character perfectly, that you never feel that anything is reciprocated. But it is the thing that's difficult about this film. Roger Ebert, who really, I think, by and large, really enjoys this movie and gave it a good rating and loves it. For him, this was the thing where I think his comment was something along the lines of, this part of the character was something that didn't quite get just explained enough or explored enough to almost to kind of justify it. Because if it's not explained and justified, it becomes, I suppose, just titillation that isn't necessarily appropriate.
I suppose, on one hand, you think, well, they've given the audience enough credit to realise she's got a crappy home life, terrible father, who beats her and physically and verbally abuses her as well, and then she's attached onto the next guy who's shown her warmth and kindness. So on the one hand, they give the audience the credit, but also at the end of the film, you think, well, I'm not sure if this girl's going to go on to have an incredible life and settle down, or whether or not she's, those cracks that you see are going to be a negative thing. But yeah, and also the one other thing is the beautiful moment at the end of the film where she plants Leon's plant in that field, and he comments about neither of them having roots, and they finally put the plant in roots, and someone has looked at what plant it is and said it wouldn't survive half a year outside like that.
Oh, shame.
Yeah,
that's depressing.
That undermines Sting, doesn't it, coming in at the end?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's worth a mention, isn't it? What a great... it does date again. It makes it feel so very... It's a 90s movie, but that Sting song at the end is just what you need right at the end of this movie.
Yeah, it's like something to settle your stomach after a roller coaster. Think, oh no, it's okay, Sting singing. It's okay. Cool. Well, I'm going to go and get a glass of milk and water the plants. Sam, thanks. Good luck with your move, and we'll be with you all in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening / watching.
Cheery bye.
Cheerio. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that, don't forget to click the like button. You can share this with your friends on Twitter and Facebook, TikTok probably. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about all our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.